Hello, whispers in the dark viewers. In today's video, I will tell you our Bloody Mary story. You may feel scared while listening to this story. If you are ready for horror and mystery, let's start. The rain pounded against the windows, casting eerie shadows across the dimly lit living room. Sarah sat on the couch, her brow furrowed as she listened to her friends recount the local legend of Bloody Mary. "I'm telling you, it's real," Jake insisted, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "My cousin's friend's sister's boyfriend's roommate did the ritual, and he swears he saw her face in the mirror." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Come on, Jake, you can't seriously believe that urban legend. It's just a story to scare people." Mia shuddered, pulling her sweater tighter around her. "I don't know, Sarah. I've heard some pretty creepy things about that abandoned house on the edge of town. Maybe we shouldn't mess with this." Tom chuckled, draping an arm around Mia's shoulders. "Ah, come on, Mia. It's just a silly superstition. What's the worst that could happen?" Lily, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up, her voice soft and measured. "Some superstitions have a way of being more than just stories, you know. There are things in this world that can't be easily explained." Sarah glanced at Lily, sensing a deeper meaning behind her words. But before she could respond, Jake jumped up from his seat. "That's it. We have to try it. Who's with me?" He looked around the room, his gaze settling on each of his friends in turn. Mia's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. "No way, Jake. I'm not going anywhere near that house." Tom raised his hand, a mischievous grin on his face. "I'm in. This could be fun." Sarah sighed, knowing that once Jake had an idea in his head, there was no dissuading him. "Fine, I'll go. But I'm telling you, it's just going to be a waste of time." Lily remained silent, her expression unreadable. Jake clapped his hands together, a triumphant smile on his face. "Awesome. Let's do this. We'll meet at the old house in an hour. Bring a mirror if you can." As the group gathered their things and headed out into the stormy night, Sarah couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of her stomach. Something about this felt off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. The drive to the abandoned house was tense, the only sound the patter of rain against the car windows. Mia kept glancing around nervously, while Tom tried to lighten the mood with his usual brand of humor, but even his jokes fell flat. When they arrived at the dilapidated structure, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over her. The house loomed before them, its broken windows and crumbling facade a testament to its long-abandoned state. "Are you sure about this, Jake?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake grinned, his excitement palpable. "Absolutely. This is going to be epic." He turned to the group, his expression serious. "Remember, we have to say the ritual 3 times, and then Bloody Mary will appear in the mirror. But we can't say her name again after that, or she'll come after us." Mia's face paled, and she clutched her mirror tightly. "I don't know about this, you guys. Maybe we should just go home." Lily placed a hand on Mia's arm, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "It's okay to be scared, Mia, but we're all in this together, and we'll get through it." Tom chuckled nervously. "Yeah, Mia, don't worry. I'll protect you from the big, bad Bloody Mary." Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "All right, let's just get this over with." The group made their way into the house, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The air was thick with the scent of mold and decay, and Sarah couldn't help but feel like they were being watched. They found the old mirror in a dusty, abandoned room, its surface clouded with years of neglect. Jake positioned himself in front of the mirror, the rest of the group forming a semicircle around him. "Okay, everyone ready?" Jake asked, his voice low and intense. Mia hesitated, but Lily gave her an encouraging nod. "I'm ready," Mia said, her voice trembling. Tom grinned, trying to appear confident. "Let's do this." Sarah sighed, resigning herself to the situation. "Fine, let's get it over with." Jake took a deep breath and began the ritual, his voice steady and clear. "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary." The group held their breath, the air thick with anticipation. For a moment, nothing happened. and Sarah felt a surge of relief. But then, the mirror began to fog up, and a chilling presence filled the room. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, and she instinctively took a step back. Suddenly, a face appeared in the mirror, its features distorted and haunting. The group let out a collective gasp, and Mia screamed, dropping her mirror to the floor. "Run!" Jake shouted, and the friends scattered, fleeing the room and the terrifying presence they had unleashed. As they raced out of the house, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of dread and foreboding. She knew that they had opened a door to something they couldn't possibly understand, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Bloody Mary was only the beginning. The house seemed to loom taller and more menacing as they approached, its broken windows like empty eyes staring out into the night. The peeling paint and crooked shingles were barely visible in the dim light as rain poured down, drumming against the rotting wood and pooling in the cracks of the overgrown pathway leading up to the door. A flash of lightning illuminated the dark sky, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. Jake was the first to break the silence. "So, are we all ready?" he asked, his voice betraying just a hint of nervousness. Mia clutched her sweater tighter, glancing up at the house with dread. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered, barely audible over the howling wind. Lily placed a comforting hand on Mia's shoulder. "We'll be fine, Mia," she said softly, though her own face was etched with concern. "If anything goes wrong, we'll leave right away." Jake opened the door with a creak that echoed through the desolate space, and the friends hesitantly followed him inside. The air was thick and damp, carrying a scent of mold and decay that made Sarah wrinkle her nose. The wooden floors creaked underfoot, adding an eerie cadence to their footsteps as they navigated the dimly lit halls. They found the mirror in a back room, its frame covered in dust and tarnished with age. The glass itself was clouded, almost as if it were hiding secrets it had been forced to witness. The room seemed colder than the rest of the house, a chilling breeze brushing past them despite the lack of windows or any apparent source of airflow. Jake positioned himself in front of the mirror, his expression solemn as he glanced at each of his friends. "All right, this is it. Remember, we say it 3 times. No more, no less." Mia's hand was visibly shaking as she clutched her own small mirror, and Sarah could feel her own heartbeat quicken in anticipation. Tom stood beside her, his usual carefree demeanor replaced with a tense determination. Lily stood slightly apart, her face unreadable, as if she were bracing herself for something none of them could see. Jake took a deep breath and began, his voice low and steady. "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary." The silence that followed was almost deafening. The group held their breath, their eyes fixed on the mirror, half expecting, half hoping, that nothing would happen. For a moment, it seemed like it might be just that. A silly, empty ritual that would leave them laughing nervously and calling each other cowards. But then, something shifted. A faint mist began to form on the mirror's surface, slowly thickening until the reflection of their faces was obscured by a strange fog. The room grew colder, the temperature dropping so quickly that their breath turned visible, little puffs of white in the still air. And then a whisper, a soft, chilling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Who calls me?" The words echoed around them, twisting and distorting, as if spoken by a voice that had forgotten how to speak. Mia whimpered, backing away, but Lily placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her even as her own face grew pale. Jake swallowed hard, his bravado faltering. Is that you, Bloody Mary?" There was no response, but the shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, stretching across the walls and floor as if they were alive, writhing and shifting at the edges of their vision. The mirror fogged up even more, and a shape began to take form within it. Indistinct at first, but growing clearer, more defined. A face. It was gaunt and hollow-eyed, the skin pale and stretched tight over sharp, angular features. Its lips were cracked and bloodless, and its eyes were empty, dark voids that seemed to swallow the light. The figure stared back at them, unmoving, yet full of an unnatural malice that made their skin crawl. Mia dropped her mirror, letting out a strangled scream, and stumbled backward. The face in the mirror twisted, a grimace of fury that seemed to reach out through the glass. The shadows coiled and pulsed, as if feeding off their fear, creeping closer. "Run!" Jake's voice was barely above a whisper, but the urgency in it spurred them all into motion. They bolted from the room, their footsteps thundering down the hallway as the whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls in a chorus of mocking laughter. But no matter how far they ran, the sound followed them, growing louder with each step. They reached the front door, but it wouldn't budge, the handle cold and unyielding as if held shut by an unseen force. "Let us out," Mia cried, pounding on the door, her face twisted with terror. Sarah's gaze darted around the room, and her heart sank as she caught sight of the mirror hanging on the wall across from them. The face was still there, staring at them with those empty, unblinking eyes. And then, slowly, it began to move. Not within the mirror, but out of it, pressing against the glass as if it were a thin veil holding it back. "Get back!" Tom shouted, pulling Mia away from the mirror as the figure began to push through, its ghostly form stretching and warping, reaching toward them with twisted, claw-like fingers. Lily grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her to the side just as the figure's fingers brushed against the floorboards. "There has to be another way out," she whispered, her voice shaking. They stumbled down another hallway, ducking into a side room as the whispers continued to chase them, filling the air with a sense of dread so thick it was suffocating. Shadows moved along the walls, flickering and stretching as if they were alive, bending and twisting with every step they took. Finally, they found a small window, barely big enough for one person at a time to squeeze through. Jake scrambled toward it, pushing it open and motioning for Mia to go first. "Go, go!" he urged, his face pale with fear. One by one, they climbed out, each feeling an icy grip on their ankles as they slipped free of the house, as though it were reluctant to let them go. The last to exit, Lily glanced back one final time, her eyes meeting the dark voids staring back at her from the mirror. Outside, the storm had subsided, leaving an unnatural stillness in its wake. They stood in silence, drenched and shivering, their eyes wide with terror as they stared back at the house, half expecting the figure to appear in the doorway, or worse, to follow them out. Jake broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. What did we just do?" No one answered, each lost in their own horror-stricken thoughts. But Sarah knew, deep down, that they had crossed a line, that they had unleashed something that couldn't be stopped. And as she looked into the shadows surrounding them, she realized that the ritual was far from over. Bloody Mary was no longer bound by the mirror, and she was coming for them. Rain dripped off their clothes as the friends huddled in Sarah's dimly lit living room, still trembling from their encounter. The silence weighed heavily on them, each one lost in the memory of that ghostly figure pressing against the mirror, clawing its way out. Jake leaned forward, his face etched with excitement mixed with fear. "We saw her. We actually saw Bloody Mary. Do you know what this means?" Sarah shot him a glare. "It means we're in serious trouble, Jake. You saw what happened. Something followed us out of that house. You still think this is a game?" Tom shook his head, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Sarah's right. This isn't some thrill ride. There was something wrong about that house. I don't think it wanted us to leave." Lily sat on the edge of the couch, her gaze distant, as if replaying every moment of the night in her mind. She hadn't spoken a word since they'd arrived at Sarah's, and her silence only added to the tension. Mia, visibly shaken, clutched her knees to her chest, rocking slightly. I can't get her face out of my mind. Those eyes, they were empty, like she was looking through me. Jake rolled his eyes. "You guys are overthinking it. Maybe it was some freaky reflection or an old mirror trick. Bloody Mary is just a legend. There has to be an explanation." Just as he said this, the lights flickered. Mia let out a small gasp, her eyes darting to the corners of the room where shadows seemed to pool. The faintest whisper brushed against her ears, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her heart race. "Did anyone else hear that?" Jake brushed it off with a nervous chuckle. "The house is old. Probably just the wind messing with the wiring." But then, a creaking sound came from the kitchen, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Each of them froze, exchanging nervous glances. Sarah stood up slowly, her gaze fixed on the doorway. I thought we were alone. The footsteps stopped as quickly as they'd started, leaving a silence so thick it was suffocating. Tom got up, forcing a laugh. All right, I'll go check it out. There's probably nothing. He disappeared into the hallway, his footsteps echoing. Moments later, he returned, pale and wide-eyed. The back door was open, and I swear, I saw someone standing by the window. Sarah swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. We closed that door when we came in. Mia's face paled, and she wrapped her arms around herself tightly, rocking a little faster. She followed us. I know she did. I don't know why, but I can feel her. It's like she's watching, waiting. Jake scoffed, though his bravado was beginning to fade. This is all in your head, Mia. You're just scared, and you're letting it get to you. No, Jake, it's real. Mia's voice was filled with desperation. When I was a kid, I saw things. My mom said I'd make up stories, but I saw shadows, figures that shouldn't be there. I learned to ignore them, to pretend they weren't real. But tonight, she saw me. She's going to come for all of us. Lily shifted, her gaze dark and troubled. Mia, you're not wrong. Some things cling to people, especially when they've been summoned. Everyone turned to look at her, curiosity and dread mingling in their expressions. Jake raised an eyebrow. Wait, what do you mean? Cling? How do you know so much about this? Lily hesitated, a flicker of fear crossing her face before she sighed, gathering her resolve. There's something I haven't told you. Something about my family. She glanced down, twisting her hands together as if struggling to find the words. My grandmother used to tell me stories about Bloody Mary, more than just the ones everyone hears. She claimed that our family was cursed. Tom frowned. Cursed? What do you mean? Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. My great-grandmother. She was accused of being a witch. They said she summoned spirits, dark forces that plagued the town. And when she died, they did something to trap her. They say her spirit was bound to the legend of Bloody Mary. It became a curse passed down through our family. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously between them. I didn't believe it, but what happened tonight? It felt familiar. Jake's bravado evaporated, replaced by dawning horror. So you're saying that Bloody Mary is your ancestor? And that we somehow unleashed her because of you? Lily's face was pale, guilt and shame filling her eyes. I didn't want to tell you. I thought if we didn't believe, she couldn't hurt us. But the ritual, it awakened her. Mia buried her face in her hands, shaking her head. So what do we do now? She's going to keep coming, isn't she? Jake gritted his teeth. We can't just sit around waiting to get haunted to death. We need to go back to that house, do the ritual again, maybe find a way to break whatever connection she has to Lily. Sarah shook her head furiously. Are you crazy? Going back there is just asking for trouble. What if she's stronger this time? Jake's eyes flared with determination. Then we make her stop. We need to face her. Show her we're not afraid. Lily's voice wavered. It's not that simple, Jake. My grandmother used to say that once you summon her, you can't just send her back. She's bound to us now, bound to me. Tension crackled in the air, their fear mingling with a growing sense of mistrust. Each of them began to look at Lily differently, wondering if she was somehow the reason they'd been targeted, if she was the doorway that had let Bloody Mary into their lives. Tom's voice broke the silence, quiet but firm. Then if we can't send her back, we need to find a way to protect ourselves. Lily, you must know something. A way to keep her away? Lily hesitated, a look of despair crossing her face. My grandmother kept a diary. She said there were rituals, ways to bind spirits to create protection. But I don't know if it will be enough. Sarah put a hand on Lily's shoulder, softening as she saw the fear and guilt in her friend's eyes. We'll figure this out together. But we need to stick together. If we turn on each other, that's exactly what she wants. Jake rolled his eyes. Fine, but I'm not just sitting around doing nothing. Tomorrow, we're going back to that house. and we're finding a way to end this." The group lapsed into silence, each of them lost in their thoughts, the weight of Lily's revelation settling heavily on them. Outside, the storm raged on, and a shadow seemed to flicker in the corner of Sarah's living room, shifting and swaying like a figure just out of sight. A faint whisper drifted through the room, cold and chilling, barely louder than a breath. "Who calls me?" They all froze, eyes darting around as they realized that whatever door they had opened was not so easily closed. Bloody Mary was here, and she was closer than ever. The night was black as ink as the group approached the abandoned house once more, its broken windows and crumbling walls barely visible in the sheets of rain. Thunder cracked overhead, each rumble vibrating through the air, as if nature itself was warning them to turn back. But they'd come too far. Lily led the way, clutching a worn, leather-bound diary, the last remnant of her grandmother's collection. The pages were filled with strange symbols and chants in faded ink. She glanced back at her friends, each of them trembling but resolute. "Once we start, there's no going back. The chant is meant to protect us, but it can only work if we're united. If even one of us wavers..." Sarah reached over, giving Lily's shoulder a firm squeeze. "We're with you, all the way." The group moved inside, feeling the heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the house close in around them. The dusty room with the old mirror stood as they'd left it, though somehow it felt more sinister now, the shadows deeper, the silence thicker. Jake was the first to step up to the mirror, his face set in determination, though a flicker of fear darted across his eyes. "All right, let's get this over with." They arranged themselves in a circle around the mirror, each gripping a small candle Lily had instructed them to bring. Their shaky flames cast long, eerie shadows on the walls, flickering as if responding to an unseen breath. As Lily opened the diary to the page with the chant, the air grew colder, and the candle flames wavered. She began to read, her voice soft but steady. "Guardian of shadows, keeper of light, we call upon thee in this blighted night. Bound to this mirror, bound to this place. Release the spirit, restore this space." As the chant continued, the temperature dropped further, and the wind outside seemed to howl with fury. Sarah clutched her candle tighter, her breath fogging in the freezing air. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw something shift in the mirror. A face, twisted and contorted, staring back at her with hollow, rage-filled eyes. "Bloody Mary," she whispered, her voice trembling. The mirror fogged up, and Bloody Mary's face emerged, her features twisted with fury, her dark eyes fixed on each of them in turn, piercing through to their very souls. She raised a skeletal hand, pressing it against the mirror's glass as if testing its boundaries, her mouth curling into a cold, malevolent smile. Then the real nightmare began. One by one, their deepest fears began to manifest. Jake saw the face of his younger brother, who had passed away, staring back at him with empty eyes. He gasped, reaching out, only to watch the image melt into something monstrous. Tom's fear of heights took hold, and he felt the room stretch, turning into a dizzying abyss beneath him, the floor vanishing into darkness. Sarah was paralyzed as her own reflection stared back at her, a look of lifelessness in her doppelganger's eyes. The reflection whispered, "You're just like me, empty," and cold hands seemed to close around her throat. Mia, meanwhile, clutched her candle so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her gaze was fixed on the corner of the room where her mother's form appeared, wrapped in shadows, whispering accusations and blame from Mia's childhood. The shadows seemed to thicken, pressing closer as her mother's figure became more hauntingly real. Lily, though terrified, kept chanting, her voice growing louder to overpower the chaos. "Spirit begone, we cast you away, to realms of shadow, where you must stay." The spirit in the mirror began to writhe, her face twisting with rage as the words seemed to tear at her like invisible claws. But then, her lips parted, and a low, guttural laugh filled the room, reverberating off the walls. "Fools," she hissed, her voice like nails on glass. "You think you can rid yourselves of me? I am only the beginning." The room fell into darkness, the candles snuffed out in an instant. Panic surged through them, each person scrambling blindly, the weight of dread crushing them. Suddenly, a light appeared, a flickering blue flame hovering in the center of the room, casting eerie shadows on their terrified faces. The face of Bloody Mary emerged from the darkness, floating beyond the mirror now, her form dark and ghostly, yet very real. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, another presence loomed, taller, darker, its features hidden in shadow. It radiated an aura of malice that was far stronger than Bloody Mary's. Lily's voice wavered as she looked into the looming figure's abyssal eyes. It wasn't just her. There's something else. Something that's been feeding off this curse. The figure reached out, dark tendrils snaking through the air, wrapping around the group like chains. Each of them felt an overwhelming pressure, as though their very life force was being drained away. In desperation, Lily remembered her grandmother's final words in the diary. When all hope is lost, remember, only light can banish the dark. With a sudden clarity, she grabbed her candle and struck a match, whispering a fervent prayer under her breath. The candle sparked to life, its flame burning brighter than before, growing in intensity until it was blinding. She held it high, the flame illuminating every dark corner of the room, pushing back the shadows inch by inch. The figure recoiled, a horrible screech filling the room as the tendrils loosened and pulled back. Bloody Mary's face twisted in agony, her form beginning to fade, pulled back toward the mirror. The shadowy figure behind her seemed to disintegrate in the light, evaporating into nothingness. Together, the group joined hands, their voices rising in one final, desperate chant, invoking the light to cleanse the house. Light of the living, cast out the dark. From shadowed corners, leave your mark. Bound to the depths, where darkness reigns, we break this curse, dissolve these chains. The mirror shattered, sending shards flying across the room, each piece glimmering with an ethereal light before turning to dust. The oppressive presence lifted, and the room filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the patter of rain on the roof. The house was still. The cold had vanished, leaving only a faint warmth in its wake. One by one, they opened their eyes, breathing heavily, realizing they were unharmed. The presence was gone, banished by their unity and the light that had saved them. Outside, the storm had subsided, and a sliver of moonlight peeked through the clouds, casting a gentle glow over the abandoned house. The group walked out in silence, feeling a strange sense of peace and closure. As they reached the edge of the property, Sarah looked back one last time. The house stood empty, lifeless, as if the curse had finally been lifted. Lily exhaled deeply, relief flooding her face. It's over, but as they turned to leave, none of them noticed a faint figure in one of the upper windows, watching them go with a look of unfulfilled rage, its hollow eyes burning into the night. Though they had escaped, a new legend was born, one that whispered of a spirit waiting in that old house, ready to return when summoned. And so, as they left, one question lingered unspoken in their minds. Had they truly broken the curse, or had they merely become the newest chapter in its haunting tale? Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked our video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like our video, and share your thoughts with us in the comments.